Good afternoon, good morning. I am Dr. Cindy Joseph from The Wish Fulfilled, and we are having another episode about spiritual awakening and people who have undergone this experience. I have with me Mr. Yaw Nsiah,
Asia.
Insian.
Yes.
I love that. Okay.
Very good.
Mr. Yaw Nsiah. I think today's conversation is going to be really, really, really good because this conversation is going to be geared to anyone who's ever questioned about rules, wrestled with their faith, or ever felt like the ground shift beneath them
Yeah.
with regards to beliefs that they thought would never change. So I want to go ahead and introduce my guest speaker. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how did you come about to this spiritual awakening?
Absolutely. I wanna begin by thanking you, Cindy, for having me on your platform. It's a pleasure to come on here and speak, about, spiritual awakening. So I hope that people gain a lot of value, from listening to this. So just a little bit about me. My name is Yao. I am from Ghana. I was born and raised in Ghana, West Africa. I moved to the US when I was 16 years old. Mom brought me over. Really, it was more about pursuing an education. That tends to be the main reason why our parents back home, you know, in West Africa, well, Africa in general, want to take their children out is to, for them to pursue an education. So I was brought here at the tender age of 16, and mom was with me for a few months, and she basically went. So I was living with family members, living with uncles and things like that, uh, getting used to a different environment. Fortunately, I spoke the language already, so that wasn't an issue. English was not a problem for me when I came here because I already spoke it. But it was more of the cultural nuances and the differences, is what I had to kind of get accustomed to.
Yeah, so similar to you, I'm first generation American. My family is from Haiti, and it is a difference, right? Coming into a new country and being able to navigate this new landscape. I'm sure there were a lot of challenges that is associated with just the transition over and getting acclimated.
That's right.
The fact that you're from the motherland, tell me more about your culture and like what values that you guys kind of have. And did you bring that to the US with you? Is it still a part of you?
Absolutely, right? Values like discipline, respect for the elderly, just family. Family's at the center of everything. As a foundation. Some of the nuances to that, there are similarities here, depending on what part of the country you're at, right? Every part is different as far as the
Mhm.
values, but it's hard for some people to understand, right? The idea that, for example, if you were to have a wedding, let's say, the whole community wants to be a part of it. That is such an odd concept. People
Here.
like, it's like, wait, what? The whole community wants to be at my wedding? This is the whole
Hmm.
thing of you have to know people closely to do certain things with them. Where in our
Hmm.
culture, it's, the community as a whole is celebrating with you, right? That's the
Hmm.
whole idea, because
Hmm.
this is a milestone in your life. So if it's, weddings, funerals, things of that nature, the community as a whole want to come in and acknowledge, that milestone and celebrating with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually studied African psychology, and one of the prime differences that would mark African psychology to be a priority in African cultures where you value community. Culture, community, respect are some of the values that carried you coming from Ghana to the US. So bring me forward to the time right before your spiritual awakening. What was your mindset like? Like, where were you living? Like, tell me all the details of like, so we can help the viewers to understand like where you were mentally prior to this
Yeah, what I
spiritual
would say
awakening.
is I grew up in the church growing up, right? This is interesting because my mother was Catholic, my dad was Methodist. So it was
Mm,
this interesting dynamic at home where I was going to church with my mom and my siblings, and then my dad isn't with us. So, when you're a little child, you're looking at that, you're like, what, why? Why is dad not going with us to church, right? And it's
mm.
just because it's different. He happens to be in a different denomination than my mom was, right? So, I definitely grew up in the Catholic faith. Now moving over here, I continued not the Catholic per se, but I was in the Christian faith when I moved here as well. I was involved with the starting of churches. I was, one of the media people that was helping getting things set up and, all those things. So for many years, I did that. But always, there was always something that didn't seem right to me when I was in those environments, right? It was like, I know that we're doing certain things because that is kind of what we do, but it never made sense to me. But, I was like, why are we spending so much time in this place? And I say that because I was comparing it to seeing, for example, the churches here, like the American churches.
Mhm.
They would go for maybe an hour,
Yeah.
and that was the end.
Yeah.
I mean, African churches, I'm talking, they'd be there for 3, 4 hours. I'm like,
Yeah.
what are we doing? And some of those things just didn't add up to me. When things like praying in tongues even didn't make sense to me. I'm like, I know we're saying something, but I don't understand what we're saying. So how am I supposed to be speaking something that I don't understand? And it just didn't add up. So I started to just ask them questions, not ask other people, because even that, when you start asking people questions like that, you start to be viewed in a certain way because then you're questioning things. So I didn't ask it out loud. It was more of just asking myself. And then that led me to a path of really wanting to know, why we do the things that we do, not even just in religion, in every aspect of life.
Mhm.
So it started with my Christian faith, but that idea of questioning things spread out into other areas of my life as well. Digging deep and asking why things are the way that they are.
What prompted you to be a person that kinda questions? Like, why were you not one that kinda went with the flow?
I would say it's kind of hard to say sometimes because I didn't have this like major turning point thing that happened that caused
Mm,
it. It was more of, I think spirit was guiding me towards that slowly over time.
mhm,
uh,
mhm,
Whether it was certain material that I came across, certain books that I saw, so certain videos that I would come across. I think Universe Source was just throwing things at me, constantly from different places, right? And fortunately, I was able to grab some of them. I didn't grab all, because sometimes things will come at you and, you know, the beliefs that you have and the conditioning that you have will stop you from tapping in.
mhm,
But there are a couple of things where I was able to overcome that. That whole keeping your beliefs, right? No matter what, even if it doesn't serve you, you're still holding on to your beliefs. I was able to overcome that by tapping into some of the things that I feel like God, source, universe was sending to me, whether it was a video, a book, that somebody would recommend to me. Once that window is open, there's no turning back. You just keep going. That is the best way that I can describe it. As soon as I was able to tap into that, it was just the floodgates open. I just started digging and digging. Again, that applied to every area in my life.
What was it like for you to have, like, a glimpse of perhaps this is not what I think it is? Do you recall, like, what that feeling was like for you? How did it shift things for you?
I felt frustrated because
Mhm,
you're taught to see certain things a certain way, right? And then you come to find out that it actually doesn't have to be this way. And then it's like, you're seeing, even though you've seen that it doesn't have to be that way, you're still surrounded by people who are still ingrained in that way of thinking, the way that you used to think, and you feel frustrated. It's like, man, if only people could just be open to just a new way of thinking, they could transform themselves, right? So there was frustration, there was anger, when you start to tap into the truth, you get angry. Also sadness. It was just a mix of so many emotions, right? Because you're sad for not only for yourself, but for people who haven't been able to know certain things that could help them. You're sad for yourself because you didn't know. You have regrets. Like, if I knew, I would have done this. So it's this whole basket of emotions.
Were there any specific beliefs, um, that you begin to question or that begin to, like, lose its shape, like, begin to shed itself?
The biggest one for me was the idea of what God is, right? I mean, that's such a huge one. The idea of God being a being that resided outside, right? A being that was watching over us, because that is something that, if you're a Christian, that is how you see it. You see God as an essence or as a being that is above you and is looking over you, right? And is watching your moves and your behaviors, and because we say things like, don't offend God, or don't do this to God. And it makes sense because as human beings, we can't even conceive the idea of what God truly is. So They came up with a human way to, make it understandable for us. They humanized God,
Mhm.
which is such a diminishing what God is in such a major way. So to me, that was the biggest one, to understand that God resides within me, that that same power that was behind the creation of all things is also within me as well, and I'm an extension of that creator. That was a big one. That was one that shook my understanding of things.
How did you come to know or experience that knowledge?
Well, a lot of it was from learning, reading, and also not just reading, but reflecting on what I was reading. But the thing that really made a difference was sitting with the knowledge, sitting with the information. Once I read it, asking myself questions like, what does this actually mean? And just thinking. When you start to do that too, your spirit, you know, you start asking questions internally, then spirit starts to speak to you and it starts to
Mhm.
give you answers because you are processing, you know, what it is that you're learning. And some of those answers started coming to me, that God is not outside of you in any way, shape, or form. That God is inside of you and inside of everything that is around us.
You talked about how there were books that you read that kind of really helped you along your journey. Is there a book in particular that stands out for you that really made a mark or an impression on you the most?
There are many. One of them definitely was Conversations with God. And even that idea that somebody was having a conversation with God and was writing a poem so that we can see the conversation. I mean, a few years ago, I would consider that to be blasphemy, essentially. Like, how can you talk
Mhm.
to God? So you're talking to God and then you're going to tell us, the readers, that you talk to God. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But a few years ago, I wouldn't even considered reading something like that. Right. But I was open to it. I was able to read it and it answered so many questions, things, light bulbs were just going off in my head. Like, okay, so that's what this is about. That's what this means. And it was just one revelation after another. I would say that was one. The Secret was another one, in terms of like manifestation. I read a little bit of Think and Grow Rich. I didn't really dive into it in a big way, but I read it. So many others. It's more of it is video. I listen to lots of videos. I watch a lot of things on YouTube.
What was the time period for you with your spiritual awakening? How old were you at the time? And how long would you say was the time period of you gathering information?
How old was I at the time? I would say it started when I was in my mid 20s, about 24, 25. And it's interesting because I started this awakening, and for whatever reason, I relapsed. And a lot of times, if you don't have other people around you, uh, who can help you in your new way of thinking, right? Who don't see things the same way that you do, you can end up regressing. For whatever reason, a source brought me back, you know, in some way, shape, or form. I got back into the religious way of thinking of things, and then source was showing things to me again that was showing me that you've seen now what it looks like because you have a reference, you have something to compare your previous experience to now. So I was able to give back again. Source was throwing things at me, people that I was meeting, things that I was randomly coming across as far as, books to read and videos to watch. And it was just never ending. And sometimes you have to pay attention to the signs, you know, because a lot of times we tend to want to ignore that, things that come to us. And I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I didn't.
Would you call those signs synchronicities?
I would say, yeah, synchronicities, awareness,
Coincidences?
uh, intuitive hits. There are many ways to describe that.
You talked about a couple of things. I'm
Okay.
trying to go back. You talked about conversations with God and how that was something that you didn't fully buy into at first, someone
Mhm.
having a conversation with God. But it's interesting because Moses had a conversation with God. We rely on the Bible for guidance, but then the Bible has incidences that we feel is now outdated today. So the concept of being able to talk with God, we don't feel like that's a plausible thing. And it goes back to like prayers being one way and not being a two-way conversation. But I thought that was an interesting thing that you pointed out, like how that was not believable. And I think for a lot of people, it's not believable, but you've overcome that and realized through your research and knowledge that it is, in fact, possible to have conversations with God. What was the most challenging part of your awakening process?
The most challenging part was being able to surround myself with people who saw things the way that I did,
Mm.
because again, that was the one thing that I didn't have that led me to um, going back. And I don't think going back was a bad thing necessarily, because I mean everything's neutral anyway. So it was just part of the journey, I believe, right? Because sometimes it's good to go back so you can have a frame of reference.
Mm.
So, but just having people around me had the same values that I had the same mindset, new mindset that I embraced, right? Because I think that would have helped me to be able to elevate.
Finding your village,
Yes.
you can imagine that not being easy
Mhm.
and going back to a place of comfort and familiarity probably was easy.
Yeah.
How did you cope with any feelings of like fear or overwhelmness, loneliness during your process?
I think having these weren't physical mentors, but they were people that fortunately we're in a time where you can have mentors even if they're not in a physical space because of online, things like that. So having, people who would encourage me, been through that process that I can listen to and having their wisdom and their knowledge basically give me inspiration to keep going, keep working on myself and trying to be the best version of myself constantly. And I mean, it's a never ending journey anyway. There really isn't a point where you say I've arrived. Here I am. I didn't have anybody around. I was a loner. In that sense. Then you end up becoming very introverted. I was introverted. Already anyway. But when you start to think differently and then you can't even speak about it, it makes you even more introverted.
This felt more like a very self-directed, self-discovery journey for you, and I can only imagine relying on your, like, intuition or your inner knowing being important for you. I want to speak more about what daily rituals you may have, like, engaged in that really helped you to kinda stay on par and to strengthen that intuitive hits that you were talking about earlier.
Meditating. I wasn't very consistent when I started initially. I was doing it here and there, but I got to a point where I decided to make that. In terms of the consistency, I would say this past 3 years is when I really decided that I was going to be consistent with it, make it non-negotiable, every morning, even if it's for 5 minutes. There's some days
Mhm.
where you just don't have lots of time, but I made a promise to myself that I would do it no matter what. The minimum definitely was 10 minutes. The journaling, I did it here and there. That's one that I could improve on. Just getting your thoughts out of your head, being able to express your thoughts on paper. I think there's something powerful about that, right? Because we have thousands of thoughts each day about an endless number of things. But when you're able to get it on paper, you make it tangible. That's the way that I see it. You make your thought. I wouldn't say you make it real, but you make it something that you can see with your eyes when you write it down. But when it's just something that is in your mind, it's just kind of just there, and then you have other thoughts coming in, and next thing you know, it's a whole mess going on in your mind. But when you're able to bring it out and put it on paper, you can identify it, you can spot it, and say, okay, this is the thought that I at this particular moment. How can I reframe it?
Mhm.
How can I change it into something that could
Mhm.
benefit? So I've done that. I would say the meditation though definitely is the most important.
Yeah, at therapy, we often prescribe journaling because it serves a purpose when you're writing like letter by letter, word by word. It helps you to organize yourself as you go along because you're trying to construct these sensible sentences.
Yeah.
And it can't be what you mentioned, the jumble that's in your head, where it's like half sentences, run on sentences, etc. So it does really help you to organize your thoughts a bit. Meditation, journaling, a lot of people would say that these are tools in this spiritual journey. What purpose does it serve for you?
With the meditation, I mean, being able to still your mind, the mental chatter that we do each day, I think it helps a lot. Well, let me say this on that, right? It's
Mhm.
not about shutting out the thoughts when you're doing it. It's about observing the thoughts and the things that are coming as you are being still. So the
Mhm.
stillness, really, the point of it is to get you to observe and identify the thoughts that you're having, and being able to, as they come in, just kindly let them go.
Mhm.
So anybody that's watching this that may believe that they try meditation, they're doing it and have too many thoughts and therefore they're failing. You're not failing. What is taking place is just that the meditation is giving you a chance to observe what you're thinking about, right? So when the thoughts are coming in, just let them come in. Let them come in and just gently let them go. A lot of times the breathing is a way to let the thoughts go away.
I've done a video about how meditation has been like my primary tool in a toolbox with my spiritual awakening journey, and how deep breathing scientifically reverses your fight or flight response. When you get into a meditative state through deep breathing, you can begin to move across your wave patterns. You'll go from alpha to delta, etc., so that you're more in a drowsy but alert kind of state of mind. And that really pulls you from the conscious to the subconscious. And when that happens, you're able to do exactly what you say, which is observe your thoughts, because you're not attached to the emotions that comes with the actual
Right.
thoughts. And it's such a powerful thing. It's also my way of like having this two-way conversation with God, because I feel I sense or see and sometimes even hear things. If I ask a question, I'll be able to get an answer. Sometimes right there in my meditation, and other times shortly after the meditation. The other piece that you mentioned was about like calming your thoughts. That's important to note, because thoughts create, right? And if we have 10,000 thoughts per day, you're creating a lot. And being able to harness that and be able to get control of that, or even just to settle your mind a bit so that you're intentional about what you're actually thinking, i.e., creating, it's a really important tool in you elevating yourself and really moving through this spiritual journey. So I want to pause here and ask you, what's different about you, and how do you now move through this world now comparison to before?
Man, I definitely move with more confidence, more assurance, because once again, the idea that I am God in the flesh operating here as an extension of the creator. If you really tap into that idea, it's going to change you. It
It's going
really
to
is.
shift some things.
Because it's such a I mean, our minds almost can't comprehend that, right? Like, what do you mean? When I came across that in the beginning, I was like, what? I am God in the flesh and actually an extension of the source itself, the thing that created everything. It's like, what an idea, right? So just being able to operate more from a sense of confidence, being able to step into the world and knowing that I create with my thoughts, right? I create with my imagination. Like, I really pay attention to some of the thoughts that I have. Like, when something comes in, I really like take some time to think about it. I see things from a deeper perspective, definitely compared to a few years ago.
What lessons have you learned about yourself in this journey?
My lessons are man, you ask some amazing questions. I'll tell you that. These are the see, that is why you got the PhD right there. Yeah, yeah. You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing for sure. But anyway, what are the lessons? One of the lessons off the top, I'll say that comes is that and everybody has an opportunity to be the best version of themselves. And it may not come through, or you may not create the best version of yourselves in a way that makes sense to everybody. People are not going to understand it. And it's okay, because it's a process that's unique to you as a person.
Yeah.
It is your process, it is your journey, right? And there's an opportunity for every single person on this planet to tap into that, the best version of themselves. It's not something that some people were born with, or something that is miraculously given to you. Everybody has that. That's the only one that I could think of at the moment. I mean,
No, it's a really good point. You're speaking of being able to access your highest potential. And in order to do that, you have to overcome a lot of limiting beliefs.
yeah,
And you spoke about leaving your country to come to this country. And we talked about briefly acculturation, and that process for an individual is very difficult at times. Thankfully, there was not like a language barrier for you to have to overcome. But there are other things where you're questioning your own identity. You understand? Like, how do I fit in. Who am I? And the impulse to just cave in and be like everyone else, just to fit in. But this process forced you to forge your own identity and just be you and stand 10 toes down on who you are. But the question of like, how do I reach my highest potential? It's a journey.
Yeah,
And to know that you are God in flesh, you have God essence within you and you have all the capabilities to become
that's,
everything that you want to become. Like nothing is out of reach for you unless you don't believe it. So that overcoming that belief and those limiting beliefs and feeling, a sense of worthiness, I think it's an ongoing journey, but it's definitely the journey in a lot of aspects, in a lot of ways for people who are coming through this spiritual awakening process.
yeah, absolutely. And I would say one of the things too, coming from from back home, even though religion is a big aspect of our culture, as Ghanaians. So we are into religion. We go to the church. We do all these things, right? But the society is set up in a way that it's very much survival mode, right? So the idea of really trying to get to know yourself deeply and tapping into who you are is almost, I don't even know how to say it. I wouldn't say it's a foreign concept, but it's not important, and it's understandable, right? Because this is why you want to get up on those hierarchy of needs, right? When you're in survival mode, you are in no place to be thinking about wanting to elevate. At least if you're going with the ego. So let's identify that as well. If you're fully tapped into your ego, it's going to be strictly survival mode, making sure that you are fed and all the basic stuff, right? But you won't be at a point where you want to even beyond that, but thriving and living life fully. So I don't judge people when it comes to that, because I get it. If you're in survival mode, it's extremely hard to get out of that. If you're telling somebody, for example, is in lots of poverty, right? Telling them that they can use their imagination to create. It's a wonderful idea, okay? It's a wonderful idea, but let's be honest. The average
Mhm,
person isn't trying to hear that. They
mhm,
want to know how they can get this bag, how they can get this money, keep the lights on, the
mhm,
basic things.
mhm,
So my thing has always been, how do we get people to go up that ladder, right? To go up
mhm,
up that hierarchy, and how can we do it in a way that it's not, let's start from your hierarchy of needs and let's in one full scoop get you all the way up to thinking about consciousness and all these. It's just not going to work. People don't, you need to take them through a process to get them to that point. So
mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the Maslow hierarchy of needs and how that those basic needs are at the bottom, but self-actualization is all the way at the
same.
top. Yeah, and I'm just gonna be honest, for just a moment. When I first saw the hierarchy of needs, in school, I remember thinking to myself, because it starts off with your basic needs, food, shelter, water,
Yeah,
and then it's relationships, love, and then at the top, the pinnacle is self-actualization. And I kept thinking about a homeless person and how that would work. Like they're not worried about shelter because they just want food, right? And then once they get shelter, now they can think about relationships and love and that sort of thing. And I would think about that hierarchy of needs and say most people don't ever get to self-actualization. But thank God I had that thought because God wanted to show me different because it's so possible to get to self-actualization. And to be honest, it almost feels like a top-bottom approach sometimes when you really get into the weeds and you drive your nails into you truly taking on like a self uh discovery journey within you.
yeah,
You begin to self-actualize, and in self-actualizing all of your needs, like the money, the cars, the this, the that that
uh-huh.
you've ever wanted, it all just starts to move towards you because you realize like you have access to all of it and there's no limiting beliefs or anything like that that's kind of holding you back from accessing it. So it's sorry, that blew my mind for just a
No, no,
moment.
it's great. I mean, you hear in the Bible it says he first the kingdom, right? We
Kingdom.
read this all the time, and it's like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Seek ye first the kingdom, which is this. You are the kingdom. The kingdom is within you. So it's amazing because we read all these things. The kingdom of God
Mhm.
resides within you. Seek ye first. And it's like, but at the same time, we're thinking that God is outside. And it's like, no, but the book is saying the kingdom resides within you. Why don't you believe that? You know, it's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, but yeah, so what I think is interesting is so I felt like I was holding up a cube like this, and I was looking at it this way. And then my spiritual awakening journey said, turn it around this way. So it's like the same concepts and principles, but we've been missing parts of the message. And I wanted to talk more about that. Do you feel the same? Do you feel like and I can give you a couple examples to help run along, but what are your thoughts on that?
They definitely. I've had to um again, source keeps throwing things at me as I'm thinking about things, I'll get little nuggets in here and there. But definitely being able to reframe some of these things that we've learned is key because we have been a lot of times when you look at how the word, which is, the Bible, right, how it's being talked about, it's very literal. And so because we see it in such a literal way, we're going to miss lots of things because
Mhm,
to me, it's a coded book.
mhm,
So, and it even says it in the word that if you want to really understand it, that you have to read it with your Holy Spirit. So then what does it mean? If you're reading it with your Holy Spirit, then you can't just read it with your mind
carnal.
literally
Mm,
and understand it from a literal perspective.
mhm,
You will get some things from doing that, right? But to get the true essence of what it's saying requires a different mind. You have to be transformed by the renewing of what? Your mind, right? So that renewal of your mind, when you start to read it from that mind that is renewed, things start to come to you where you're like, whoa, okay, so that's what this actually means. That's what this, you know, to me, it's a philosophical book. It's a scientific book. It's a physical book. It's all of it, right? And of course, it's not the only one. There are other books out there, too. But it has so much knowledge in there that we are not fully tapping into, unfortunately. And
mhm.
I mean, I can give some examples of that. I don't know if you want me to get into all of that,
Absolutely.
but one of them that I can think of right now is there was a story, right, about Jesus meeting the disciple.
Matthew or Mark.
Yeah, Matt, I believe it was Matt. And he was fishing, right? And he kept trying, and nothing was happening. And then Jesus told him to what? Put his net on the right side. Right.
Mhm,
And then he did that and he was catching all his fish, right? Now, if you have to read that literally, you would say, okay, he just cast his net on the right side of the boat and he just caught all this fish. If you were to look at it literally, like, okay, that's what that means. But then if you start to look at it deeper, if you have a deeper understanding of it, it's talking about our minds. We have our right brain and our left brain. Our left brain is the logic, analytical, all these things. Our right
mhm.
brain is the intuition, the uh,
Creativity.
creativity, all of that. So what he's essentially saying is tap into the right side of your brain because that is
Mhm,
where everything that you desire, the creativity, intuition, manifestation, all those things, that is where it resides. So if you tap into that, you're going to get whatever it is that you desire. Right now, so when you see it that way, you're like, okay, like wow. Jesus going up and sitting at the right hand side of the Father. It's like,
mhm,
why do they keep telling us right, left, right? Like, okay, why does it matter for us to know what side of God Jesus is sitting? You see what I'm saying? Like, why is that
mhm,
important? Right hand side of the
mhm,
Father, your Father is your mind, right? Again, it's on the right side, which is the right side of your brain, So that's why when I say that it's a physical book, this is what I mean. It's talking about our minds, how our minds work. It's talking about our spirits. It's talking about emotions. Everything about us is laid out in that book. Now it's how do we get to understand these things? And how do we get this message across to people so that they can not only understand it, but practically, use it? So for me, that is what I'm more interested in is the practical stuff. Because if we've had enough of the theory, we've had enough of the messages, the surface level stuff, it's time to get practical and say, how do we practically use all these things that saying and use it to actually change our lives for the better? That's where I'm at, now when it comes to the Bible specifically, because there is
mhm.
so much in there and that could be so beneficial.
For me, there's also the aspect of belief. I think it's huge in Christianity. I think it's huge in a lot of religions. Just to also say this one point, a lot of the concepts in Christianity are also concepts that are in other religions, Hindu, etc. And so there you can find a line of commonality, and you have to begin to ask yourself, why is that? Like, there is a message that's being put out there, and how do we begin to kind of tap into what's actually being said to us? So the biggest thing for me is belief, and how, the scriptures talk about how ask and believe, and how Jesus would go out and heal people, and people would say, I have a sick one back home, but he said, go back home because your belief has healed them. That those pieces for me is really, really important, but we don't tap into, like, in religion, how that actually works. And there's a difference between faith and knowing and belief, in how you can believe something, but if your sponsoring thought don't allow you to truly engage in that belief, then it doesn't really come through. And how we can begin to regulate our systems such that we are connecting, and becoming closer to the oneness, such that your belief actually does move things. Because even Jesus said, these things and more shall you do as well. And so even when you talk about, like, conversations with God, and how the concept of communicating with God seems like a foreign thing, like it's an antiquated thing, but Moses did it, and Jesus did it, and are we not all children of God? You understand? And so, um, connecting those dots, I think, are the things that are missing, um,
Yeah.
either in how the scriptures are explained in sermons, etc. But it's the missing piece that I feel like the spiritual awakening journey has really highlighted, is how to connect all the dots together.
Yeah. I mean, there are many things, even with affirmations, right? We speak of affirmations. You hear something like, let the weak say I am strong.
Yes.
That's an affirmation. Let the poor say I am rich. So there are affirmations in there. So if you're somebody who may not subscribe to your affirmation, the affirmation is in the book.
Yeah. But more than that, it's also a way to combat your ego.
Yeah.
So when you do feel like you're in a low place, and it's telling you to use your words as power, because in the mouth is your tongue has the power of life and death, right? And so it's telling you to use your words to change your
Hmm.
circumstance. It's literally saying that. So if I'm weak, say that I am strong instead, and ignore the pretenses.
Exactly. I mean, I could get into so many things when it comes to this. It's such a fascinating gift that has been given to us. It's just a matter of how do we use it to its full potential. Really, is kind of what It's funny. I was having this conversation with my wife. I was like, I'm at the point in spirituality, right, where I want to know. I'm coming from a Christian background, obviously. You know what? I thought to myself, I want to know what Jesus was saying to the disciples when he was sitting with them. Because I know, yes, he was going around preaching, he was talking to the people and with his words and everything. But I'm sure, like, when they were done and they'd go and meet together, he would have a talk with them about what was discussed, all the things that he was saying. Because I'm sure some of them were a little confused by some of the things he was saying. I want to know. I'm at a point in my spiritual journey where I want to know what he was telling the disciples behind the scenes, because there's always the esoteric, which is what is taught to the masses, and then there is the exoteric with the X, which are the truth behind what was said to the masses,
Mhm,
right? Like the
mhm,
meaning behind the meaning. I'm at the point where
mhm,
I want to know the meaning behind the meaning. Like, what did he
mhm,
actually mean when he said that?
mhm,
And that is what, as a disciple, that was what it was about. They were being basically educated and initiated into the deeper spiritual concepts and the deeper spiritual truths, right? That is why not everybody could become a disciple. There's a reason for that, because they were being taught, they were getting deeper into the knowledge, and the majority of people were given more of the surface level stuff, and I've reached that point where I want to just get straight up into the deep stuff. And that's what lights me up at this point.
but the raw, unedited.
We've been through that. We hear it, the same things all the time, the same messages. Like, at some point, it says what? That you gotta start eating meat at some point. You can't be feeding on milk all the time. You gotta get to a level where you can take more of the deeper concepts, right? So
Mhm.
yeah.
It seems as if your journey with regards to your spiritual awakening was guided through your level of questioning, right?
Yes.
And I think that that's another thing with regards to like religion is this mystic can't ask too many questions. God only knows, you know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
But that is all based on what your understanding of God is. Right? If you're looking at God as something that is outside of yourself, then that would make sense. You would say it's not something to question. But then when you get to the understanding that God is you as an extension, right? You are an extension of the creator. A part of you is the creator, right? And you are co-creating in everything that you do in this life. You're basically your life is a co-creation with the supreme being or the creator itself. You are in a partnership with that creator. When you start to understand that it's actually something that is internal, then it's easy to question things. But if it's a big guy that is upstairs above you, yeah, of course you can't question it. Whatever that being says that's above goes. And it can't be questioned in any way. And some of it too is not even I don't think the unwillingness to question is some of it is just an unwillingness to look at things differently because it requires your ego has to be checked, right? A little the ego of the pastor, whoever it is that you're dealing with, they're going to have to check the ego as well, right? Because they've been taught that this is how it goes. This is the way of seeing it. So you come in with a question that has the potential to deviate away from what they know. It's dangerous. It's dangerous territory because then you're asking them to re-examine everything that they know. And how many people want to do that? Most people have no desire to do that because it's work. It's a lot of mental work and a lot of ego. So I can understand why most people don't want to do it. I totally understand it. That's why I want to have a sense of understanding with people because I know it's challenging to step outside of it.
Absolutely. It's a foundation that people have built a house on,
Yeah.
and you have to like literally dismantle this house and change the foundation and start all over again. And it's not an easy process. I can only imagine that, but it's definitely a rewarding process where you're able to rediscover yourself and just like strengthen your abilities, strengthen your senses, strengthen your way of looking at life. So there's a lot of different concepts. I don't know if we can go into them, but a couple of them that come to mind for me is do unto others as you would want others to do unto you. That one highlights for me how we're all one and we're not divided by our races or our religions or any of that. We're actually a human race and we are one and we're reflections of each other. And that's why if you should do unto others if you would want to want to you, because oftentimes how you judge another person is a judgment you bring on to
Yeah.
yourself. There's another one with regards to how Jesus talked about how it's easy for children to go into the kingdom of God. And the kingdom is not this extra place, but it's really it's a state of being, it's a state of mind, right? And the reason why it's easier for children because they don't have as much programming. They don't have as much heavy lifting of like negative beliefs or doubts and like how long it takes for a kid to realize there's no Santa Claus? Like they believe the thing wholeheartedly. So it's very easy for them. And their unburdened belief um, really is the door that helps them to access whatever they want to access in life. And I think it's a very, very beautiful thing. And the last one, which I think it's a very shattering one, in Genesis, it talks about, I think it's Genesis 1:27. It talks about let us create in our image.
I did not know you would go there, but that
It's
one
it's
right
it's
there.
that and how Jesus talks about like this and more that you shall be able to do, and how he says me and the Father are one, and the fact that we're all children of God. Like it's in our face, but we have to like just that's how I read. I've always known this scripture, but like I see it differently now.
That part, the let us, man,
Yeah.
that's the one that it's going to be. How do I put this? I think that's one that is a tough one for people. If we were to dive into it, it'd be a tough one for people, lots of people to get their heads around because it is, it is something else. When you really get
Yeah.
into it, is with us and all of that. It's like, yeah, you are getting into a rabbit hole there for sure. But that's a big one. Yes, I do agree. I do agree. But these
Yeah.
are some of the things that and we are at an age where, thankfully, willingness to question those things is much higher. I think people have had the confidence to ask questions now, and rightfully so. There used to be a
Yeah.
time where there was, if anybody will come across the Bible, it would be a certain elder or a certain pastor or whoever the spiritual leader was, right? That was the only person that had access to it, and that was the only person that could translate it to you and tell you what it means. And then we went from that to being able to get copies of it ourselves to read it,
Hmm.
and now it turns into different versions. Now we have gone from all of that to a point where we can really start asking some deeper questions about what these things, and that wind of awakening is blowing, and it's blowing hard all over the world. I mean, it gives me so much joy, to see it, especially on the African continent. That
Hmm.
asking tougher questions, people have to relearn, and people have to rethink, and it can be hard work.
So I hear your journey was paved through questioning, right? And then I also hear that in this journey, you've learned that there is no need for an intercessor, that you have direct contact, you have direct
Yeah,
access to the information that you need for your own spiritual growth, which is interesting because that was Jesus' whole point, right? He wanted us to be able to fish on our own and not depend on someone else, but to open up our eyes that we have the power of and the power within to access all the fishes that we would want if we just believe.
yes.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, yeah. I must say I'm very excited to see what is happening. To see again, I'm Ghanaian, I'm African, so I'm always going to bring it home when it comes to that. But it's just exciting to see that we're at a time the awakening is happening, and it's happening in a major way.
Yeah.
Because it's about time. I mean, I think to me that is the missing piece. Now, me and you we're melanated, so let's speak on that a little bit. When it comes to this topic, right? Religion, as we know it in the standard religion.
Unpack that. And I probably can say a thing or two in helping to unpack it. But I think what you're trying to say is that religion has become this steadfast thing within our community. African communities are already communities that are communal, meaning we move as a community, we don't move as an individual, and we value and put high emphasis and importance on community. And so if the community, the masses are moving in such a way where religion is prime, it takes priority, then we tend to hold and we grip onto it with dear life,
Yeah,
but we've also been born into it, right? You and I, and so many different generations have been born into it. Meaning, you talked about how you were in a household where mom was Catholic and dad was Methodist. You were born into that, so you were at an early age. You were exposed to the values and the scriptures and the rituals and all of the things, right? And you I'm going to get into my psychology bag in just a bit, but the process of identity is one in which when you become an adolescent and on, you start to question whether or not the beliefs that your parents lended you are actually yours. And there's a number of ways, we may have to split this episode into two, but there are a number of ways that you can do so. My whole dissertation was on this, where you can have identity confirmation where you fully explored your identity, questioned everything, fully explored it, and you said, okay, this is me. Or you can have an identity foreclosure, which just means this is what I was taught. I'm closing the book on it. I'm not exploring anything.
yeah,
I'm not trying to like, it is what it is for me. I'm good here, you
right.
know? And then you have identity moratorium, which is I'm questioning everything, but I haven't fully explored anything. So I'm out here in the space. And so I can move and sway however, that sounds good, because I'm questioning, right?
Yeah.
But I haven't explored for myself, and so I'm swayed by any good thought or
I
that
was
sounds
there for a
actually
little
sounds
bit too. I was there for
yeah.
the being swayed, right? You don't
Mhm.
have a foundation that you're on, because that foundation you've had, you've broken it a little. So
Yeah.
anything can kind of come and take you, away for a while. But I'm at the point where I've found that foundation now, that I can stand on and say that God source resides within me, right? And that is the basis behind, practically everything now, for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the spiritual awakening process is not just on religion, questioning religion, it's also questioning anything in life that does not serve you. Any thoughts, any logics, any training. Even with me, with the field of psychology and what works for like healing a person, I can see aspects of it within the metaphysical concepts. But then there's a piece missing, and there's a huge piece missing. And it's kind of like religion. Like I see belief, but you got to teach me how to truly believe, like how to have mind heart coherence, how to challenge my ego, how to like there's more to the story, and we're not given access to that missing piece that help us to bridge to the other side. And so within our communities we move collectively, but if one person doesn't step away and begin to question the fragment that holds us together, how are we ever going to evolve
exactly.
as an entire
In
community?
any tribes, somebody has to be the one person that is willing to take the risk to. I'm going to use this example as if you want to talk about very tribal, evolutionarily speaking. Somebody has to take the risk to take a bite of that plant that we have no idea what it is. It kind of looks like it's edible, but we somebody in there got to take that risk and take a bite and hopefully hope that he don't die, right? Somebody's got to be willing to do that. If not, we won't know, and we can have a situation where everybody eats it and everybody dies. Like we don't want that, right? But unfortunately, that one person. Now, I'm not saying that somebody has to go risk their life. I'm using this as an example in the sense of somebody has to depart away from the normal way of seeing things.
Mhm.
And this applies in our families. So that is why it's unfortunate that when we shame people going away from the norm, it doesn't even make any sense because you look at our progress as a human race. It's all people going away from the norm. You can't tell
Yeah,
me one advancement, one thing that has not been
absolutely.
because one person decided, you know what, this doesn't make sense. Let me try it this way. All of our inventions, it all comes from somebody who was willing to ask questions, who was willing to dig
Mhm.
deeper, who was willing to say, this isn't right. If you look at it from a humanitarian sense, the Martin Luther Kings, the Rosa Parks, and all of that, right, is from somebody saying that, no, we got to get away from the norm. Somebody had to say, I'm not sitting in the back of that bus. Somebody had to do it, right?
Mhm.
So instead of celebrating those people, which we do a lot of times when it comes to the humanitarian stuff, like we do celebrate those people. When it comes to how we really see things, as far as spirituality and other things, all of a sudden we are unwilling to do that. We are unwilling to celebrate the different thoughts and the different ideas that those people bring to the table, right? So they could bring something that could advance, make things better. But it doesn't mean that there's a guarantee that they're going to do that. But at least they're pushing the envelope, and that's needed for us to evolve as a people. And I'm talking especially to us as melanated people. We have to be willing to do that. If
Mhm.
somebody steps, puts their neck out, let's help them.
Embracing change,
Embrace the
and
change.
change is constant.
Embrace the change. You know,
Yeah.
because this world is moving without us. This world is going whether we like it or not. It's
Yeah.
advancing, it's moving forward. And we need to get in on this party and also try to move forward as well. And that's also
Also,
questioning things.
I also want to mention that sometimes when we question things, we may not land at the same conclusion.
And that's okay.
But the point Right, and that's okay. And the point of the exercise is to question nonetheless. I remember moving from undergrad to grad school, going into my master's degree. When you are in undergrad, it's a lot of like rhetorical, like you wanting them wanting to you to spit back what they give to you
Mhm.
in the lessons, right? So we have multiple choice questions, we have forced choice questions like true and false. And then every so often we get an essay. I'm talking about the American school system. I'm not talking about anybody else's school system. But that is the method, right? But then when I got to grad school, I'm writing like 20-page papers because they want me to really think about everything that I truly think or believe or concepts or my rationale behind this and that. And there's no multiple choice questions. Not I didn't get like a single exam in multiple choice or first choice. It's mainly just essays. And what my teachers taught us was that in undergrad, they're just giving you the basics of the information. But in grad school, you are becoming the creator of the information.
Right.
So you have to force yourself to think a little and go beyond just being a tutelage of someone who's just gathering information. And so that's why the Socratic method is such a great way to learn the cycle of questioning, constantly questioning, and why is this and why is that? And the truth of the matter is the answer is always within you. So when we say the question, we don't mean um, that we always land at the same conclusion that, your truth and his truth and my truth, they may all be different from the point of where you are in your
Right.
life, but continue to evolve and continue to question is the idea. I wanted to invite you back because I think
Yes.
this is a topic that I think we can really dive into as it relates to uh, individuals within the African diaspora who are engaging in a spiritual awakening journey, and using your expertise and minds to really build a conversation around that. I think that would be amazing for us to get into for another episode. But before we go, what are some takeaways that a viewer can have as they find themselves at the apex of religion and spirituality, and what does it mean for me and the desires that I have in my life, and how do I um, crystallize my identity?
So this is for somebody who is at a crossroads, basically, right? Okay.
Hmm.
Um, if you're at a crossroads, just know that whatever it is that you're thinking, whatever it is that you're feeling, that there's nothing wrong with you. I think, and I experienced this a little, where you start to think that something's wrong. It's like, why am I thinking differently from everybody else? Something must be wrong with me. And you start to have all these ideas in your head. And I just want to let anybody that's watching this know that if you are going through that process, that nothing is wrong with you at all. It is something that your spirit is leading you to, right? And have faith that your spirit is taking you through a journey to help you to become the best version of yourself. Keep at it. It is okay if people don't understand it, and it doesn't have to make sense. Uh, it may be a situation where you are by yourself a lot because maybe you may not be able to have those type of conversations with people, and it could be a lonely journey in that regard. But it's still a worthy journey because you are doing what ultimately we all truly came here to do, which is to know ourselves. To me, there's no greater task if you look at the world we live in, but we place so many things above what truly matters, which is actually ourselves. Like, what are we doing in terms of our spirit? Are we paying attention to that spirit that is within us? Are we giving it love for every day? To me, there's nothing greater than that. But yes, we're gonna pursue an education, we're gonna do the thing, get that job, build the business. All that stuff is fantastic. But ultimately, why are we here? We are here to know ourselves fully. Spend the energy and the time into knowing yourself fully. Because once you can do that, man, everything else comes along with it. So you'll be able to have more peace because you are home. So anybody that is at the crossroads, I would say keep paying attention to spirit as it speaks to you. When those hints come intuitively, act on it. If you can, take action on it. And whatever other people that are saying, don't let that discourage you from continuing to embark on that path towards spiritual growth. Just keep going because the other side of it is, I mean, it's amazing. There's no better feeling than that.
Absolutely. So you're saying to know thyself, to trust thyself, to understand that you are spirit and be guided by your spirit. And the last message is to be bold, be daring and be bold. Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much, y'all, for being with me today and being on this episode. There was a lot of great takeaways from this conversation that I think a lot of people can walk away from. Thank you for being a light in this world as you continue to embark on your journey as well. And let us know how we can get in contact with you. What are your social media handles? Like, how do we follow you? How do we get more information on y'all?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel that is called Breakaway Thinker, and it's related to a lot of the things we've talked about today. Really, Breakaway Thinker is how do we break away from ideas, thoughts, beliefs that are not serving us, right? How do we get ourselves away from those ideas? How do we reframe some of these beliefs and ideas that we have and change them, in a way that will serve us? So that's my YouTube channel. I'm on Facebook. You could look me up, Yaw and Nsiah, uh, Nsiah, on Facebook. I just got on Twitter recently.
We can look to the description box for your social media handle and your a link to your YouTube page. Any last words before we close?
Well, last words. I just want to say this has been a great interview. I've enjoyed every bit of it. These are things that I just love talking about. Well, Cindy and I think we are definitely the same way when it comes to a lot of things, and I can confidently say that we both really want to see everyone, but especially us as melanated people, we want to see our people really elevate and be the best version of themselves. We truly passionate about that, and it is a joy to see that happening, and we want to see it happen even more for humanity as a whole. No question, though. But we also sometimes got to be specific and say that us melanated people, especially. So um, that's my last word.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and signing off, Dr. Joseph.
All right.